My boyfriend really disliked the daughter of his family's nanny. He bossed her around and took pleasure in seeing her embarrassed, but on a snowy night, he brought her to our apartment. She'll just stay for one night, he said. Later, my study abroad funding was cut off, and I suddenly fell from being a young lady. Also on a snowy night, she stopped me outside the apartment door. This isn't your home either, is it? He indulged her. I turned around and left. Later still, we met at a drinking party. He was still as glorious as ever. She had been pampered by him. Secretly, he grabbed my hand and said, "You'd rather become a gold digger than come to me?" In the crowd, that heir of a top wealthy family put down his wine glass. "This is my wife." On the weekend, at the mall, I saw Josue from a distance and happily waved at him, only to see Vivian following behind him. She was the daughter of his family's nanny aunt and was staying at his place. Didn't we agree, I pulled his hand and whispered, that it would be just you and me? I had been waiting for a long time to celebrate his birthday with him. I attended an all-girls high school. Usually, he and Vivian were in the same school and class and went to and from school together, so they had plenty of chances to meet. "She's bored at home," Josue said as he patted my head. That was true. She had just come here and didn't have many friends. I walked over and took Vivian's arm. "Buy whatever you want to see today. I'll get it for you." She looked at Josue, then lowered her eyes and replied timidly, "Okay." I picked out a few clothes. In the full-length mirror, Josue was tall with long legs, attracting the attention of passers-by. "What are you looking at?" He raised an eyebrow and met my gaze, his tone casual. "Josue, look at that sofa. It's so beautiful," I said, pointing at the sofa behind him. "We'll also buy this style when the time comes." Josue and I were childhood sweethearts, and our families were old friends. Going abroad to study for our undergraduate degrees together was a promise we made since we were kids, and our families had already bought an apartment for us. "Yeah, I like it too," he said as he put his hand on my shoulder and glanced at the clothes in my hand. "This one won't do." "Why not?" I asked. He had a strange sense of possessiveness in some ways. "Are you two going to study abroad?" Vivian was standing behind us. "Yes," I gave a bright smile. "I've been working hard for this goal since junior high school, and it's finally almost achieved." Hearing this, her eyes briefly landed on that sofa. Just for a moment. "Can I try this one on?" She took the clothes I had my eye on from my hand. I paused for a moment but didn't mind. It was just a piece of clothing. "Sure," I said. Inside the fitting room, I quickly tried on a few pieces but wasn't satisfied with any of them. Just as I was about to open the curtain, I heard Vivian's voice from the next fitting room. "Could you give me a hand?" Her tone was soft and delicate. I thought she was asking me, so I poked my head out enthusiastically. "Can't you zip it up? I'll come in and help you." There was silence inside. The curtain shook a bit, and she sounded a bit out of breath as she said, "It's okay now." When it was time to pay, I didn't like any of the clothes I had tried on, but she had her eye on one. I habitually took out Josue's card and swiped it. On the way back, the driver came to pick us up. I sat in the back seat, playing with Josue's hand and chattering on about many things that had happened at my all-girls school, including the mixer at the graduation ball. "Why don't you ask me if I went? Is there a need to ask?" He looked up, a smile curving his lips. Then he clasped my fingers with his. "Would you like someone else?" I liked him so much that everyone around me knew it. He was so certain. I was a bit resentful. "So," I retorted in a low voice, not sounding very threatening, "you never know." He didn't care and just smiled even more. The car arrived at my villa first. "Really not coming to my place?" "No, I need to go back and study for the TOEFL. Josue always told me not to work too hard. But going abroad to study together was one thing, and my future was another. If I wanted to apply, I would aim for the best universities." After walking a few steps, I remembered that I had forgotten to return his card to him. When I turned around, I saw Vivian in the front seat, holding her clothes and sitting in the back seat where I had just been. "She's really inconsiderate of you, always spending your money." Josue paused as he was about to open the car door. Don't let me hear you say bad things about her again. Her eyes turned red, and she didn't say anything else. I received an offer from my dream school. Josue happened to be at the school next to mine. I was overjoyed and rushed to his place without even having time to eat. I pushed open the door to his room. Vivian was squatting down, helping him pack his luggage. He was taking a shower. She had the air of a mistress as she said, "You're here. Just find a place to sit anywhere." I sat on the sofa. My mood was half gone. "Oh, he didn't tell you, did he?" Vivian had her back to me, so I couldn't see her expression. She was holding his clothes in her hand as she said, "I'm going to study abroad too." As soon as she finished speaking, Josue came out of the bathroom. His hair was slightly wet. He was a bit surprised to see me when he looked up, but he didn't question her being in his room at all. "Did you get the offer?" he asked me. "Yes." He raised his hand and patted my head. "Want to play games?" Vivian went out. The two of them didn't exchange a word or even make eye contact. "Why is she going too?" Josue scooted over and put his arm around my waist. "Huh?" His eyes were on the game. "My mom said so. She wants her to take care of me. You have hands and feet." He looked at me and smiled. I said the same thing too, but Vivian said that studying abroad was her dream and that my family giving her the money was her only chance. It was understandable for the sake of one's dream. But I couldn't help feeling sad. I tried to make my voice sound less bitter. "Don't tell me she's going to live with us." He leaned back. "Of course not. She's just like a surveillance camera for my mom. It would be so uncomfortable to live together." He lowered his eyes and taught me how to clear the game level, using my hand. "My baby is so amazing. I have a girlfriend who goes to an Ivy League school." The summer vacation passed, and we flew far across the ocean. Vivian came along. She had prepared in a rush, and her language test scores weren't good, so she was going to a community college. On a snowy night, Josue brought her back to our apartment, the home I had carefully arranged. "She'll just stay for one night," he said. The early winter wind outside was biting. There had just been an incident near her dormitory, and the security wasn't good. Josue said that it wasn't safe for her to live alone, and anyway, we had plenty of rooms. It was another understandable situation that I couldn't refuse. She did only stay for one night. But after that night, she came to our apartment more often. At first, she came to cook and deliver the dry-cleaned clothes. "Let her do it. Otherwise, she'll feel bad about taking our family's money," Josue would always say when it came to these things. "She's just like that. She doesn't have any bad intentions." After coming a few more times, if neither of us was at home when she arrived, she would wait outside the door in the cold wind, looking so pitiful that at least I knew Josue felt sorry for her. He had a key made for her. She showed it to me on the day she got it. Vivian took my hand, looking very affectionate. "I have to keep an eye on him to make sure he doesn't bully you too much." That day, it was the final exam week. I had stayed up all night studying and was going home from school. The two of them were cooking in the kitchen. Vivian called out his full name. "Josue," she said, with her voice rising at the end when she called him, "stop making trouble." The sound of the door closing made them both turn around. "Ah," she withdrew her hand, "why are you here?" The heating was on in the house. She was wearing a lace camisole with short sleeves, which made her skin look very fair. "This is my home," I said in a rather cold tone. She looked at a loss and looked up at Josue. Josue was leaning against the wall cabinet. "We thought you were at the library today and wouldn't come back for dinner." "We?" Josue said we. So what was I? I bent down to change my shoes and didn't reply. He tried to ease the atmosphere and joked, "She's so slow at cooking." She pushed him. The movement was very natural. "If it weren't for you making trouble, it would have been done long ago. You still think I'm stupid." After saying that, she patted his forearm again. He looked down and smiled. I hugged my textbooks and walked back to my room. "I'm not hungry. You two eat." After a while, the door was opened. Josue stood by the door with his arms folded. "Who are you giving that attitude to?" I put down my textbooks. I was so tired after staying up all night. I don't like her coming here. Josue, the life of studying abroad that I had been looking forward to for so long isn't like this. After saying that, I turned around. My gaze met Vivian's, who was hiding behind him. There was no guilt in her eyes. Only confidence. Sure enough, the next second, Josue frowned. She hasn't done anything wrong. What on earth are you angry about? Seeing that I didn't speak, he sneered. Are you angry because we cooked together? Then I'll tell you that we used to cook together countless times at my place. I picked up a glass that was within reach and threw it in Josue's direction. He was startled. Vivian rushed forward to protect him, and the glass just grazed her forehead, immediately swelling up a bit. Josue was quick and hugged her, scolding me, Cecilia, are you crazy? It's okay, I'm okay. Vivian's tears started falling. I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I just wanted to make dumplings for everyone. Josue looked at me, his eyes as cold as ice, as if looking at a stranger. Do you know how many Chinese supermarkets she ran to just to buy the dishes you like? She was lying on his shoulder. Her long hair fell into his palm. Josue stood up and supported her. Never mind her. I'll take you to eat. Then he turned around and left me alone in the empty apartment. Outside the window was the winter of a foreign country. This was the first winter I spent abroad. My phone rang. My brother called me. As soon as I said, hello, he immediately asked me, what's wrong? You don't seem happy? Instantly, my nose felt a bit stuffy. Brother. The courses are so difficult. I thought that with such a high TOEFL score, I should be able to understand the classes. But damn it, that professor has such a terrible Indian accent that I can't understand him again. There are so many technical terms, and I just forget them as soon as I memorize them. These were all the things that I originally wanted to talk to Josue about as soon as I got home. I had so many things to say to him. But why? I don't know. Why did it turn out like this? After a long while, my brother laughed at me, saying I was so bad. He said, then should I send you some money? Why don't you come and keep your lovely sister company? I'm in Las Vegas. There was a lot of noise on his end, mixed with the decadent sounds of a hedonistic lifestyle. Do me a favor, he said, Aiden, remember? Aiden. He is cold in nature, talks little, and is not easy to approach. He studies hard and plays crazy. This name was first mentioned to me by Josue. He was a prominent figure in their high school. Josue said, our money doesn't count. His does. Back then, I joked, then should I go and like him? He gave a teasing smile. Would he even look at you? He's the heir of a top wealthy family, someone we can never reach in our lifetime. Josue was completely sure of me. There was nothing about me that he didn't know. Because my feelings for him were impossible to hide. But what he didn't know was that I had deceived him twice. The first time. In the first semester of my freshman year in high school, my parents got divorced and divided their property. My brother went with my mom, and I went with my dad. Before leaving, my mom told me that my grandfather had arranged a childhood betrothal for me. I heard that the other person had excellent grades but had done all kinds of outrageous things. I went to Josue's high school alone after school and found that person. The curved outdoor staircase was filled with the sweltering heat of summer. That person was wearing a sports headband, unable to conceal the wildness of his facial features. He didn't look easy to mess with. The moment I saw him, I called off the betrothal. I'll just consider you as my brother. His name was Aiden. The second time. I went to the mixer at the all-girls high school graduation ball. There was a drunken revelry, filled with the atmosphere of an apocalyptic carnival. I thought Josue had come to pick me up and got into the wrong luxury car. The night was pitch black, and the neon lights were flashing. I grabbed that person's long and distinct hand and kissed him. Josue, I'm already 18. We can do whatever we want now. That person was restrained and cold. His eyes were dark, like a bewitching charm on a cold night, as he clasped my wrist. Get out of the car. Realizing my mistake, I turned around and left immediately. But I recognized him. Aiden. On the other end of the phone, my brother interrupted my memories. He recited a string of English addresses. His place. You helped me return something to him. On the streets of a foreign country, I got out of the subway station. It was between late autumn and early winter, and the air smelled of unfamiliar cedar. In the evening, there was the first snowfall on the streets. On my phone, Josue still hadn't replied to my messages. And Vivian had posted a WeChat Moments update. Our dinner, our first snow dot. I put away my phone, looked up, and found Aiden's house. 04. It was a pre-war apartment from the last century. The staircase was narrow, but the heating was sufficient. The sound of mahjong mixed with laughter and chatter. Aiden, someone's looking for you. Aiden, who was sitting in the middle of the living room surrounded by people, turned his head in response. He had an excellent bone structure, and his temperament had become more complex, both good and bad, as he grew older. The last time we met, it was dark and chaotic in the car, and I didn't dare to take a closer look at his appearance. Which romantic debt is this? The little girl has come to the door. Someone said, and everyone burst into laughter. Cut it out, the senior who had led me in pushed the person who spoke and brought a chair for me. She looks so nice. It's obvious she's not the type he would like. Indeed, she wasn't. Including this time, I was the one who had taken the initiative to come to your door all 3 times. Aiden ignored the teasing. He flipped over his mahjong tiles, stood up, took out a file folder from the sandalwood cabinet, and handed it to me. As I got closer, I could see his lips more clearly. Last time, I had bumped into them hard without any experience, but now there was no trace left at all. His lips twitched. Anything else? My brother said there's also a box of things. Can you carry it? I nodded. He turned around and motioned for me to go upstairs. The attic was getting narrower, and the snow outside the window was getting heavier. My phone rang. When I entered the room, I was feeling my pocket and didn't notice the books piled up at my feet. Suddenly, I tripped over them and bumped into his solid chest. He protected me but hurt himself in the process and let out a soft grunt. Are you okay? He asked. I shook my head, and my hair brushed against his jaw. He leaned back slightly but couldn't move. Get up. I wanted to get up, but my legs were numb. My elbow subconsciously leaned on him for support. His forearm subconsciously supported my waist and then withdrew. I'm sorry, I whispered. My phone kept ringing incessantly. He looked away and sighed. The hand that had supported and then withdrawn moved close to my pocket, took out my phone, glanced at the caller ID, and held it to my ear. Your boyfriend. On the other end of the phone, a voice spoke at the same time, with a tone full of reproach. Where are you? Did you finish eating with Vivian? Aiden propped himself up and distanced himself from me. But Josue's voice was very clear in this enclosed room. Yeah, she forgives you. If you know your place, come back quickly. I'm not coming back. Stop making a fuss, okay? Where are you now? I paused for a moment, and my eyes unexpectedly met Aiden's. I'm at Aiden's house. Before he could say anything, I hung up the phone. Aiden's eyes were calm as he picked up the box and walked down the stairs. Sorry about last time, maybe he didn't even remember it anymore, but I still wanted to make it clear, I mistook you for my boyfriend and said those things. Things like, I'm 18 now, we can do whatever we want, and so on. Just an accident. He interrupted me, his eyes indifferent. What you and your little boyfriend do has nothing to do with me. With this back and forth, the sound of mahjong in the room stopped. This conversation couldn't be thought about too deeply. Everyone wanted to ask but didn't dare to. The senior slapped his head and picked a timely topic. Little sister, he's just like this. After his fiancée came all the way to reject him in high school, he's been depressed and self-abased ever since, locking his heart and shutting out love. She would ride her bicycle to school in the severe cold to bring me hot meals. In the cold weather, her hands were red with cold, and she took out rice and hot dishes from her cotton-padded clothes, put them in a plastic box, and smiled at me. The security guards wouldn't let her in, so we were separated by the big iron gate of the school. She was so happy to see me eating that my tears fell. I called out to him, Aiden, about the betrothal cancellation. He looked back at me, your boyfriend asked where you were, and you could have answered in many ways, but you chose the most misleading one. He leaned casually against the wall. You're using me. My unseemly thoughts were exposed. I'm sorry, I just wanted to make him care about you. He scolded me, sounding quite like my brother. If this is the only way to make him care, then I advise you to break up with him as soon as possible. Seeing me with my head down, he furrowed his brows. Of course, none of this has anything to do with me. It's just that I hate people who are frivolous about relationships and break their promises the most. Frivolous, I can understand. Breaking promises, where did that come from? The black turtleneck sweater made him look fair and clean, and he seemed simple-minded. Cecilia, fortunately we called off the betrothal. She's back. As soon as the apartment door opened, Vivian whispered in Josue's ear. He didn't even turn his head. Didn't you say you weren't coming back? Josue raised his eyebrows, returning something to Aiden's house. Do you even know where his house is? Does he even know who you are? I put down the box, walked past him and entered the house. He never stopped playing with his game controller. After a while, he got more and more irritated as he played and couldn't help but look at the door of my room. In the past, I was always the one who would coax him first. Don't be angry. He pushed open the door and saw me packing my luggage. You hurt her and haven't apologized yet. He glanced at my suitcase. She doesn't even mind and has even packed dinner for you. Should I be grateful then? I said. His eyes showed impatience. Enough. I pointed at the obviously ruffled dresser. Did you touch my things? Josue looked at the broken lipstick. She borrowed it to use. Did you ask me? I looked up. Who allowed her to enter my room and use my things? I did, he said. Can't you be a bit more generous? Vivian followed in, looking innocent. Sorry, he said this lipstick looked better on me. I said how could I look better than Cecilia, and then I just tried it on. She lowered her head and clutched Josue's sleeve. I'll pay you back. I'll use all the money I earned from my part-time job to pay you. The more humble her tone was, the more it tugged at his heartstrings. It's just a lipstick. Is it really that big of a deal? He sneered coldly. She works so hard. How could someone like you understand? I kept my head down, finished packing the last piece of clothing, and pulled up my suitcase. Josue, I said calmly, is she your girlfriend, or am I? You are, he said with an indifferent look in his eyes. But she's different. He was acting all high and mighty, like he was lecturing a disobedient child. She will always have a place in my life. You'll just have to get used to it. There's nothing I can do about it. Vivian tightened her grip on his sleeve and looked up at me. I knew she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. She had won. I gave a bright smile. Josue, let's break up. She doesn't have many friends. Couldn't you just bear with? The words he was about to say to me slipped out until he realized what I had said. He froze. What did you say? In the past, no matter how fierce our arguments were, I never mentioned those two words. Because we grew up together, and the tacit understanding between us was that we couldn't be separated by arguments. More importantly, I just couldn't bear to. He knew that I cherished this relationship so much that I couldn't bear to see any bad omens for it. He clearly knew, but he tolerated Vivian's overstepping again and again. She was like a speck of sand, not too big or too small, that rubbed him in a way that was both irritating and comfortable, but it made me feel sick and brought tears to my eyes. Stop fooling around. He shook off Vivian's hand and pressed down on my suitcase, his eyes gloomy. I'll just pretend I didn't hear it. It doesn't matter whether you heard it or not. I turned around and walked out the door. Vivian tried to stop me but failed. Let her go, Josue said in an extremely cold tone. Did she really think I would always coax her? I was just trying to help you see, Vivian said, if she took anything she shouldn't have. Once the door closed, I couldn't hear what Josue said after that anymore. 06 When people are feeling sad, it's actually a good time to get things done. I didn't let my emotions affect my exams. Instead, I did even better. A few days later, the final exam week was over. The suppressed emotions came flooding back. A late-night flight. I landed in Las Vegas. A senior recognized me from afar and waved at me. "Your brother has an emergency. I'll take you to have fun." She hugged me enthusiastically, asking me if I was cold, and then if I was hungry. After making sure that I wasn't cold, hungry, or sleepy, she took me directly to the rooftop lounge. The night view of the whole city was a scene of luxury and debauchery. "Move aside, make room for my sister." Taking advantage of the familiar crowd, I drank a bit more than I should have, with a jumble of emotions. The alcohol hit me. I vaguely heard the sisters around me talking about a familiar name. "Isn't Aiden coming? Can you even get him to come? You still don't know him. He plays crazy during the day, studies all night, and after exams, he sleeps for 3 days. Have you ever seen him break this routine for anyone in all these years? What a strange guy. Couldn't he study during the day?" I thought to myself as I reached out to grab the whiskey. "Ancestor," the senior slapped my hand away. "You're already drunk. Take a break." I wanted to retort, but before I could open my mouth, I fell asleep. The music in my ears mixed with the sounds of conversation, as if the night would never end. Until the familiar smell of ebony wafted into my nose. Such a familiar smell. I remembered that narrow staircase. "Why are you here?" The surprise of the person beside me was obvious. "To pick someone up." The newcomer was concise, and his voice was clean and pleasant. "Who could make you fly here in the middle of the night to pick them up?" The next second, he scooped me up with one hand, silently answering the question. "Hotel room." The floor-to-ceiling windows were fogged up, and it was snowing outside at night. "Yeah, I've picked her up and brought her to the room. You can go back to your country without worry. Aiden was on the phone with my brother. Don't hide anything if you have something. Just say it if you need it." He was tall and had distinct facial features. Seeing through the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling windows that I was up, he hung up the phone. "Take the hangover medicine." He was holding his coat in his hand, looking hurried. He was wearing a neatly ironed black shirt. Once he finished speaking, he was about to leave. I grabbed his hand. "You said I was frivolous." He paused, clearly not expecting me to bring up old scores. "Aren't you?" "No, I've only liked one person in my whole life," I said, feeling more and more aggrieved. It's the kind of genuine feeling that even when he's old and can't walk anymore, I'll still like him so much. He looked at me with his clear black eyes. "You don't have to tell me how much you love your boyfriend." I curled up. "You also said I was using you." He didn't say anything more, but I knew that in his heart, there was still that rhetorical question, "Aren't you?" Alcohol is really a wonderful thing, making people feel a kind of craziness where there's only today and no tomorrow. "Aiden," I clearly heard my own voice, "this is what real using is like." One corner of the bed sank, bearing a weight that wasn't supposed to be there originally. Logically speaking, an adult male, especially someone as self-disciplined and exercised as he is, wouldn't let me succeed so easily. But he was really unprepared and really indulgent. "Is it fun?" He just thought I was being mischievous. I buried my head and didn't say anything, and a sense of frustration spread. Having confirmed my frivolity, he must really dislike me now. Sure enough, the next second, he reached out to push me away, only to find that my tears had wet a patch of his shirt. After a long while. "Are you really that sad?" He looked up. "Is it because of what I said, or because he doesn't love you?" I said, "Because I broke up." Aiden was used to being a favored son of heaven. Probably no one had ever treated him like this before. "Am I just a tool that you, Cecilia, can call whenever you want and discard whenever you feel like it?" He propped his left hand on the edge of the bed, smiling slightly, with a touch of self-mockery. "What does it have to do with me?" My hand answered this question in a rather offensive way. He was quick and caught it. "You're not sober." "I'm sober." I propped myself up, staring at him with bright eyes. "Aiden, I'm sober. I know what I want." Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the snowstorm came suddenly. Later I learned that it was a rare heavy snowfall in this desert city since the last century. but it was really hot inside the room. The airtight heating was like a clingy quilt, making it impossible to break free from the scalding temperature. I was afraid of the cold but also disliked the heat. He bowed his head like a vassal, staying silent throughout, not uttering a single word. I was so hot that I broke free from his hand, rolled over to seek the coolness of the quilt. No more. Go away. He looked up, his hair in front of his forehead slightly wet, his eyes looking tired, his voice deep and hoarse, and said, hard to please. I didn't bother with him anymore. Leaving him alone to take a cold shower in the late December night. 07 There was only one person who could wake me up. My dear professor with the Indian accent. I dreamed of being in class and sprang up from the bed like a carp. On the single sofa, Aiden was sleeping with his eyes closed, wearing a shirt and long pants, neatly dressed, just like when he came. Last night, I could convince myself that indulging in momentary pleasure wasn't a sin. But the daylight revealed everything. Coming to him right after breaking up, what would he think of me? I put on my shoes quietly, quickly packed my things, pulled my suitcase, and managed to close the door without waking him up. But I didn't see that the moment the door closed, his hand supporting his chin moved slightly and his eyes opened. Airport. The flight was delayed due to the heavy snow, and the airport was crowded with people. At this time, he should have woken up. Not a single message. It should be like this, I told myself. I didn't have any of his contact information, and he didn't have mine either. Back in Boston, I went to my classes, and he was still that heir of a wealthy family as people described, hard to meet even once. As I scrolled through the screen, there were several unread messages. Among them was one from Josue sent last night. Don't go too far. Come back when you've had enough of making a fuss. I'm coming to Las Vegas to play with Giu. I've got a present for you. I put away my phone and went through the security check. However, less than half a minute later, I found that all my valuables in my school bag were gone. Only the school bag was left. The wallet, passport, and even the phone inside had disappeared into thin air. Where are my things? The staff member gave me a disdainful look. Ma'am, don't block the people behind you. I lost my things. They were gone as soon as they came out of the conveyor belt. We can't do anything if you weren't careful. I called the airport police. The staff insisted that they hadn't seen my things and even questioned whether I was causing trouble. After searching for 2 hours without any result, I missed my flight. The airline staff confirmed my ticket and led me back to the check-in counter. I borrowed her phone to call my brother, but his phone was off. I called my senior, but she didn't answer either. Feeling embarrassed about occupying someone else's phone, I made one last call to the hotel front desk and got through to the landline in my room. Hello? His voice was calm and steady. Could you come and pick me up at the airport? I've lost my wallet and passport. After a few seconds of silence, I felt a surge of shame. I was really hopeless, running into such a mess like this. He seemed to change his sitting posture, and his voice rose at the end. Who is this? I vowed never to call him again. Anyone who was so chummy with my brother, no matter how presentable they looked, couldn't be a decent person. 40 minutes later, he showed up in front of me, bringing me the porridge and stir-fried crab in typhoon shelter style from the hotel, still warm. What were you going to say just now? He asked. You're such a super nice guy. The corner of his lips curled up, and he went forward to communicate with the airport police. They were a bit far away, and they were talking very fast. I couldn't catch some of the words, until the police said, she was almost mistaken for a swindler. Aiden slightly raised his eyebrows, turned his head to look at me, and said in Chinese, indeed a swindler. In the end, I don't know what method Aiden used. The staff came to apologize to me one by one, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that my things had accidentally fallen during the inspection, and they returned my wallet, passport, and phone to me. A habitual offender, involving too many things, Aiden said. I'll take you home first. He booked 2 first-class tickets back to Boston. Don't you have a private jet? I asked. Lent it to your brother to go back to the country. No wonder he didn't answer my call. He sat next to me, looking down at a book with his shirt collar unbuttoned. Didn't you sleep well last night? I asked again. His fingers that were flipping the pages paused. I didn't sleep a wink all night. It turns out that one shouldn't force a conversation when there's nothing to talk about. Like me right now, was it because the sofa was uncomfortable? He completely closed the book and looked at me with a smile. What do you think? I stopped talking and turned my face to look out of the window. He was so sleepy that he covered his face with the book and pretended to sleep. In the end, he was still very considerate and answered my question. Because I wanted to know if the name you were calling out in your sleep was his or mine. I completely glued my face to the window. He chuckled softly behind the book. The passengers in the economy class came on board one by one, passing by me. Huh? Vivian's voice came from above my head. Why are you here? Behind her was Josue with a satchel on his back. He took off his silver headphones. Cecilia, is this interesting? Following me here? I didn't follow you. The atmosphere froze. Josue had a smirk on his face, as if he had caught me in the wrong and was determined to get to the bottom of it. I just sent you a message last night, and you didn't reply. And today you're on the same flight as me. If this isn't following, what is it? I'm here to look for my brother. He blocked the aisle, and the other passengers had to squeeze past sideways. Your brother has gone back to the country. My mom saw him. He put his left hand on my seat. Go on, what other excuses can you come up with? Why don't you say you're here to look for Aiden? When his name was mentioned, my temple throbbed violently. It has nothing to do with him. Josue laughed, and Vivian followed suit. Can't make it up anymore? He tapped on the back of the chair with his finger. Don't overestimate yourself. You don't even know what he looks like, yet you dare to use him to annoy me. But it turns out I'm not even angry. The person beside me pulled the book down, revealing an extremely good-looking face. During the 3 years of high school, no matter how hard Josue tried, he could never surpass the legendary Aiden. On the surface, he seemed indifferent, but deep down, he had been frustrated countless times. I once comforted Josue, some people are born at a height that others can't reach. Don't be too hard on yourself and compare yourself with him in everything. Josue took it to heart. He said, right. At least he doesn't have a girlfriend who loves him as much as you do. Aiden's face was clearly engraved in his memory. It's just that he had never associated that face with me. So the shock at this moment made him completely freeze in place. Aiden had always been a noble young master, and he was most reluctant to embarrass others in public. So he held my hand and said to Josue, neither of us slept well last night. Can we catch up later? It was a good way out. If Josue wasn't my ex-boyfriend who had just broken up with me the night before, the flight attendant who had been holding back for a long time finally had the chance to step forward and pushed Vivian forward. The plane is about to take off. Please make way, you're blocking the passengers behind. Josue. Vivian pushed him, but couldn't move him. Josue's face was extremely gloomy, and he greeted Aiden with a forced smile. Senior, what a coincidence. Aiden ignored him. The crowd moved forward, and he was also pushed in. 20 minutes later, the plane was flying level. There were only Aiden and I in the first class, and neither of us said a word. I connected to the Wi-Fi, and my phone kept vibrating non-stop. All the messages were from Josue. Cecilia, you're great. Deliberately putting on this act, are you happy now? I haven't agreed to the breakup yet. Are you so eager? Can he really like you? Do you have to throw yourself at him? Why him of all people? Reply to my message. Hilarious. I don't really care either. I'm just giving you some friendly advice. Don't take yourself too seriously. Aiden had already withdrawn his hand and was leaning on the other side, looking at me. Am I disturbing you? I asked. He raised his eyebrows. You mean the vibration sound? I nodded. He smiled. No, it's the sound of victory. When the plane landed in Boston, the snow had stopped. Aiden and I got off the plane first, and his driver had been waiting for a long time. Where do you live now? He asked. I gave him an address. I'm staying temporarily in my classmate's apartment. He seemed a bit surprised. I didn't have time to buy an apartment yet. I felt strangely guilty. I just broke up, and the previous one wasn't mine either. He gave a very faint and quick and didn't ask any more questions. Outside the car window, the light flickered on his face, half bright and half dim. I turned my head away. Why was I feeling guilty? He didn't even ask. I'm not anything to him. All those random thoughts kept popping up. I was afraid he would ask, but also afraid he wouldn't. Suddenly, I felt a weight on my shoulder. He leaned on me without asking, closing his eyes. I didn't sleep well on the plane. My thoughts were in a mess, and I asked him, "Then why did you hold my hand?" "To read your palm." He said it seriously. Aiden asked me what kind of person the classmate I was staying with was. I said, "She's a really nice girl. Caroline was my classmate from the all-girls high school. She had excellent grades. Her family sold their house to send her abroad to study. The visas were all ready when her father was diagnosed with terminal illness. On the day she wanted to drop out of school, my father had just transferred the tuition and living expenses to me. I immediately transferred all the money to her. My father didn't scold me when he found out. He just felt sorry that I had given her the money for the plane ticket too and had to take a budget flight for nearly 20 hours. After that, my father transferred her father to the best hospital in the city and paid all the medical expenses. I can't imagine what I would do if something like that happened to me, I told Aiden. It's all because my family is rich, and my parents and brother love me, so I don't have to go through these things. She's braver than me. Aiden didn't answer me because the car stopped and I had arrived. Are you going back to your apartment too? I asked him. I'm going back to the airport. He really just sent me all the way home. I was supposed to go back to the country last night. He leaned on the car door, watching me go in. There was no snow tonight. The streets were quiet. I walked up to the third floor, and he was still looking. So when I rushed downstairs and came back to him again, he was a bit stunned. I reached out and hugged him. I was waiting for him to hug me back. "You're like this," he said with a low laugh. "How can I leave?" His hug was stronger than I expected, and it was warmer and more real. "Aiden, Merry Christmas." A few minutes ago, it had just passed midnight. "Merry Christmas, Cecilia." He asked again, "Just this?" There was more. There was something more important I wanted to say. But there was no snow tonight, and I was tired from the journey. There would be plenty of time in the future. I said, "When you come back, I have something to tell you." Have a good winter vacation." He said, "After Christmas comes New Year's Eve. He should be back by then. Next year will be a better year." At least that's what I thought at that moment. The next day when I woke up, I still couldn't get through to my brother's phone. He replied, "Busy." There were very few messages from Aiden too. It seemed they were both very busy. Until the end of the winter vacation, when the deadline for tuition payment was almost due, my father still hadn't transferred the money. That morning, I had originally made an appointment with a friend to go to the market. A group of people were setting up festival lights. My friend accidentally mentioned some financial news that I wasn't interested in at all. "Do you know about Ponzi schemes?" It was on the news this morning. The people involved have been arrested. I was picking things out and asked him, "What does it have to do with us?" Many people in the country have been cheated too. Billions of assets evaporated overnight, and some people even jumped off buildings. He recited several names in my ear. Until I heard my father's name. I don't know how I got back to my apartment. I only know that I called my father's phone over and over again, and my brother's phone over and over again. Finally, my brother answered. It was Aiden's voice. "Cecilia, find a sofa and sit down." My father had jumped off a building a few weeks ago. Not only had he been cheated out of all his money and was heavily in debt, but also my mother's and even my grandfather's money. My mother had a heart attack recurrence. Throughout the whole winter vacation, my brother had been looking for money to fill the bottomless pit, taking care of my mother in the hospital, and also dealing with the legal cases caused by my father's situation. The whole thing could be summed up in a few sentences. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't utter a single word. After a long while, Aiden asked me, "Can you give me Caroline's phone number?" Caroline rushed back from the Chinese supermarket where she was working part-time. She said that when she saw me, I looked completely dazed. Aiden hadn't hung up on the phone yet, for 5 hours. He only hung up after making sure Caroline had come back. Caroline couldn't bring herself to ask me if I was okay. She stayed with me for a long while and only asked me one question: "Do you want to go home?" She said that the plane tickets were too expensive, so she didn't go back during the winter vacation and stayed to work part-time instead, saving enough money to go home in the summer. "I'll buy you a plane ticket. You go home." She hugged me. My throat tightened. My brother needs me. At 7:30 in the evening, I received a call from my brother. "Cecilia, I'll figure out a way for the tuition fees." His voice sounded tired and unfamiliar. The last time I called him, he was still in Las Vegas. "Brother, I'll drop out of school. I want to go back to our country." He objected, "You can't help me if you come back." "I can help even a little. I'll go back to take care of Mom." We had a huge fight. Before hanging up the phone, he only said 2 things. "I've already dropped out of school. You have to keep studying. Cecilia, your life has just begun." I took melatonin and forced myself to go to sleep. The next day, I started to figure out ways to raise money. I sold my clothes and jewelry, applied for loans and teaching assistantships from the school. All the money that my friends gave me, both openly and secretly, I transferred to my brother. Until the day the tuition fee deadline arrived, my brother paid it for me. Everything seemed to be developing in a good direction. At least, there was hope in the first year at the beginning. However, the fall from one social class to another was rapid, yet long and endless. In the second year, those friends who used to be close to me and the familiar seniors and juniors hardly contacted me anymore. Even if we met on campus, we would just smile and say hello, chatting about something unimportant but definitely not touching on my current situation. I wasn't invited to parties anymore, and no one asked me to go out for meals either. Their WeChat moments were still about going back to our country on weekends, skiing vacations. While I was juggling between being a teaching assistant and doing illegal part-time jobs, my once all-A grades were also on the verge of failure because I didn't have time. My professor with the Indian accent warned me that if things continued like this, it would be a question whether I could graduate or not. In the third year, my brother didn't send me the tuition fees anymore. That night, he didn't say a word. He hid in the hospital corridor and cried for over an hour, constantly saying sorry to me. He used to be such a proud person. I knew I couldn't go back to our country. I was my brother's hope. "It's okay, brother. I got a scholarship. I'll work part-time while studying. You don't need to worry about me." But actually, the situation was much worse than what I said. I didn't get a scholarship at all. I just applied for a school loan. I quit my job at the restaurant and started writing application essays for study abroad agencies. Caroline went to Amsterdam for an exchange program. I had no reason to let her pay the rent for both places. I had already been living in her place for free for a long time. I didn't want to lose my only friend. On the night when the landlord came to ask for the rent, I was delivering takeout and arrived at a familiar address. Josue's apartment. There was a party going on inside. This was the first place I lived when I came here. At that time, I was full of hope for the future. In these 2 years, the names of Josue and Vivian were often mentioned. "Oh, that popular couple of bloggers. I've watched their vlogs. So sweet." "Yes, the guy is super handsome, rich, and spoils his girlfriend a lot." I mentioned this idea to Josue on that weekend when we were shopping in the mall during senior year of high school. Vivian was listening beside us. Just like now, I was standing at the door, looking at her sitting on the sofa that I wanted to buy back then. On a snowy night, she thought my shoes were dirty and stopped me outside the apartment door. She thought I was coming to beg Josue to take me in. She said, "This isn't your home either, is it?" He indulged her, allowing countless pairs of eyes to stare at me holding the takeout. Josue was standing behind her with his arms folded. "How did you end up like this?" I told him that I was in a hurry to deliver the next order. He looked at me with an expression that I couldn't understand. "What about Aiden? Did he abandon you?" Josue sneered. "With the money he has, would he let you deliver takeout here?" I couldn't answer. Vivian took out a handful of US dollars from her wallet and stuffed them into my pocket. "Is it enough?" She then turned around. "Who else has money? She's so pitiful." Another handful of US dollars. She gently hugged me and whispered in my ear, "Take the money and don't steal other people's boyfriends anymore." I delivered the last order and used the money she gave me to pay 1 month's rent. On my way home, I found a whole loaf of bread that was almost expired in a trash can and was happy for a long while. Just as I was eating it, my phone rang. I couldn't help but feel a tremor in my hand. Sure enough, it was my brother's call. He said that my mother was critically ill. "Don't come back. Your studies are important." Nobody said it. But we both knew that what was standing in the way was the lack of money for an extra plane ticket. I couldn't hold back my tears. If he had told me a few minutes earlier, I wouldn't have used that money to pay the rent.
The next day, he held me in his arms, slowly combed my hair, cleaned my face, and drew eyebrows for me. He drew very well.
I could go and beg him. For him, whether it was a plane ticket, my tuition fees, or living expenses, they were just numbers. He would surely agree. But what could I use to beg? Should I use the relationship between him and my brother, or the few days between him and me? If I begged, I could never go back. I smiled wryly to myself. I was still relying on my pride to get by. Actually, I could never go back to that night long ago. I wandered around. I looked up and knocked on Aiden's door. The one who opened the door was a very beautiful girl, wearing a Valentino outfit of the current season. I recognized her. On the day at the rooftop lounge, she was sitting next to me, the girl who asked, "Isn't Aiden coming?" She also recognized me. "Looking for Aiden?" she asked me. I nodded. She didn't move but leaned against the wall. "2 years ago, I borrowed money from you. Do you still remember?" I remembered. She transferred over 800,000 yuan to me in one go. "Thank you, senior. I'll save up and pay you back." "Everyone who borrows money says that," she smiled. Her tone wasn't offensive but was the sense of superiority that rich girls were born with, which I was all too familiar with. "But when I gave it to you, I didn't expect you to be able to pay it back." She paused and placed her wine glass on the ebony low cabinet beside her. "Aiden thought the same way," she said. On the narrow staircase, the sound of mahjong continued. She continued to say a few more things. "Just 2 years ago, he poured in 60 million US dollars into your family. No matter how affectionate he was, it should be paid off by now, right? Nobody's a fool, right, little sister?" After saying that, she picked up her wine glass again. "Still looking for him? I'll go upstairs and call him for you." That day, I didn't get home until dawn. All the way, I was thinking about whether people need to hold on to something to survive in this world. I didn't figure it out. But I completely and thoroughly accepted the fact that my family was bankrupt and there was no one behind me anymore. 3 years after the death of my father, who loved me the most. 09 in the third year of my doctoral studies in Amsterdam, I met Aiden. He was very conspicuous at the academic conference. His facial features were sharp, and the slightly upturned corners of his eyes added a bit of world-weary wildness. He didn't recognize me, but I saw the engagement ring on his middle finger at a glance. "I really want an autograph," my IT colleague beside me told me. My favorite game was designed by him. After the conference ended, separated by the crowd, he was talking in a low voice with several big shots. I left early. In midsummer, it was drizzling under a gloomy sky. Coming out of the cafeteria with my colleague, I recognized his car. After years in a foreign country, I thought I would never see him again. There are so many people in the world, and this was just a very small probability of an intersection. This time, it might also be the last time. Anyway, I should say thank you. I knocked on the car window. In the driver's seat was the face of a strange driver. Sir isn't here. You can wait, but it'll be at most 15 minutes. On the other side, my colleague was waiting for me. I took out a check from my bag. When I graduated from undergraduate, I found a high-paying private equity job. I saved up money to pay the first month's student loan, but was told that it had already been paid off in one go. The leader at that time told me privately that if someone hadn't informed them first, I wouldn't have got this job. Aiden had arranged everything for me, except for him and me. Please give this to him for me, I handed it to the driver. Just say, thank you. What's your name? I smiled and didn't say my name. When I got back to my apartment, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I recognized it though. The things I had deliberately tried to forget were actually the ones I remembered most clearly. I answered the call, but there was no sound from the other end. It was more agonizing than I had imagined. I looked out of the window and said, Aiden? Are you doing well? On countless snowy nights in Boston, I was lost, helpless, and all alone. All I wanted was to hear him ask me this question. I'm fine. I'm doing fine now. Don't bother with the check. I should have taken care of you. He was at the airport. There was a lot of noise, and the announcements kept coming. There's no such thing as should or shouldn't. I took a steady breath. I can't afford to pay you back for anything else. I could work my whole life and still not be able to pay it back. But at least for my tuition fees, I'm giving it back to you. I originally wanted to thank you in person, but I thought you probably wouldn't care about this amount of money and I didn't want to take up your time, so I asked someone to give it to you. I won't bother you again in the future. After a long silence, he said, I'm getting ready to go back to our country now. The plane just arrived this morning, and now he's going back again? Is he in a hurry to go back to see his fiancée? Well, when he falls for someone, he's always been impulsive. What's a flight of more than 10 hours to him? Then I won't hold you up. Goodbye. He asked, will you come back with me? What was this? I went back to see my mom before the Chinese New Year, I said. It's not about taking you back to see your family on the way, he said in a low voice, imitating that long ago, settling old scores tone. Cecilia, you broke your promise. Even earlier, way back when nothing had happened yet. It was as sweltering as it is now. I was alone, going against the flow of students leaving school, and found him on the curved outdoor staircase. Come back with me. Let's get married, he said. After getting the marriage certificate, he looked cold and detached, with no obvious emotional fluctuations throughout the process. He went back to California, and I went back to Amsterdam. On the private jet, he put the engagement ring on my ring finger. After putting it on, he didn't let go of my hand. Why didn't you come to me? I lowered my eyes. I was young. I was afraid you'd look down on me. His hands were much bigger than mine. I couldn't avoid them even if I tried. Josue came to see me when you were in your junior year, he said. I looked up, and he looked back at me and continued, he said you went to see him and begged him to help you. He asked me why you'd rather go to him than come to me. Did you believe him? I asked. If I were rational, I wouldn't have believed him. I would have come to confirm with you, he said with a faint smile. But when it comes to your affairs, I've never been rational. That was why he didn't come to me but chose to help me behind my back. He thought I didn't love him. After getting off the plane, Aiden, just like before, insisted on seeing me to the entrance of my apartment. What are your plans after graduation? He asked me. My coursework in my final year is really intense. I basically have no days off in a week. I didn't know what to say. I looked down at the ring on my hand. I originally planned to get permanent residency and work here. It was too impulsive. When people calm down, they realize there are many obstacles in between. His assistant reminded him from a distance that time was tight. I pushed him gently. Be careful on the way. Goodbye. He looked at me quietly, turned around and walked a few steps, then pressed the elevator button. When the elevator arrived, he didn't get in but turned back instead. I thought he had something to tell me. If there's anything else, just send me a message. He lowered his head and kissed me. Heat built up as our lips and teeth touched. He was so gentle with me that I forgot he was someone who had done all kinds of wild things when he was young. I felt weak and limp, and he put his arm around my waist with one hand and carried on. The door shook as I wasn't on guard, and I bumped into it. He chuckled and apologized. Does it hurt? Tears fell from my eyes for no reason. He couldn't bear to see me cry and hugged me tightly. I'm sorry. This apology wasn't just for this time but for many, many times in the past. But he had already been very good to me. It's no use regretting now, he said. No matter how old and immobile you are, you can only be with me. Happy newlyweds, Cecilia. 17 on our first wedding anniversary, Aiden and I had a cold war for half a month. The reason was that I had no intention of going to live in California after graduating. On Christmas Eve, Caroline had a rare holiday and invited me to go to California to visit her. I didn't tell Aiden about it. There's a business association's drinking party. Do you want to go? She asked me. When my family had problems before, the president of the business association had also helped me a lot secretly. My brother sent me money, and I should go and return it to him. Before the drinking party started, I went to see that old gentleman but only met his son. My father has gone back to our country, he refused to take my money. It was also with the help of your grandfather that our family could stand firm back then. Your brother has also set up a company in our country. You guys have made it through, he couldn't help but sigh. Sister, you're very brave. I was stunned. I had said the same words to someone else many years ago. But my state of mind was completely different now. I insisted on returning the money, but he refused to take it no matter what. During the back and forth, we were accidentally seen by others. I didn't expect to meet Josue at the drinking party. He was still as glorious as ever. Vivian had been pampered by him. Josue stared at my face and then glanced at the money in my hand. He didn't say anything and just turned around and entered the drinking party. Did you graduate from undergraduate? Vivian looked me up and down, seeing that there were no recognizable brands on my clothes, and she couldn't help but smile. We haven't been in contact since then. I only heard that your grades were bad and you might have trouble graduating. I was really worried. Caroline gave her a dirty look. She's already graduated with a doctorate, okay? Do you think everyone is like you? When Vivian graduated from undergraduate, her blogging career was booming. Until someone exposed that she had faked her school background, seemingly leading everyone to believe that she and Josue were studying at the same prestigious school, but in fact, she was at the neighboring community college. The public opinion changed overnight, and in the end, she had to delete her account completely. Which school? Vivian suppressed her surprise and asked another question. I told her the name of the school. She looked as if she had expected it. A school in Denmark. Never heard of it. You can't make much money after graduating from there, right? Indeed, I can't make much money. I told the truth, and her smile grew wider. The air in the room made me feel sick, so I got up and went to the bathroom. At the end of the corridor, another banquet had just ended. The crowd was bustling, chatting, and laughing. I walked along the wall but was grabbed by the hand. You'd rather become a gold digger than come to me? Josue's voice was neither too loud nor too soft, and this romantic affair made strangers keep looking back. For a moment, I became the focus of everyone's attention. What gold digger? I frowned and tried to pull my hand away. Isn't it? Otherwise, how have you survived until now? He insisted on getting an answer. Since that old guy can do it, why can't I? In the crowd, that heir of a top wealthy family put down his wine glass. This is my wife. Aiden and I hadn't seen each other for half a year. Hearing his voice suddenly, I thought it was on the phone. He pushed through the crowd and brought me behind him. Vivian came over when she heard the noise and stood there in shock. How is this possible? Later, Caroline told me that Vivian had been asking about me all the time. She asked if you had signed a prenuptial agreement, how long you'd been married, if the Aiden family knew about it, and if you had climbed the social ladder by having a baby, Caroline complained on the phone. Isn't it more and more uncomfortable the more she asks? She'll never get the answers she wants. The Josue family doesn't like her. They haven't let the two of them get married for so many years. She's going crazy with anxiety, she said. I heard that after Josue went back to our country to take over his father's company, he insisted on some kind of transformation and lost a lot of money. But I didn't care about any of this. That day, I went back to Aiden's villa in California with him. The empty rooms had no sign of life. There were only a few pieces of furniture necessary for living. There was even only a mattress. Busy with work. Didn't have time to pick out furniture, he said simply, pouring a glass of whiskey. Anyway, I live alone. He almost gritted his teeth when he said the last sentence. Don't you want to ask me what I'm back for? I sat on the mattress, looking at him who was leaning against the liquor cabinet. What are you back for? He was quite cooperative. To remind you to fulfill your obligations. The shimmering light of the pool shone through the floor-to-ceiling windows and intertwined with my hair. I turned over, but he wasn't there. Walking to the staircase, I heard him on the phone. On this pitch-black night, I could hear the voice on the other end of the phone clearly. Are you kidding me, big shot? You call me at 3:30 in the morning to ask if your wife loves you? What on earth are you doing? What do you know? Aiden's collar was half open, and the moonlight fell on his prominent brow bone, making his eyes shine brightly. He had been crying. She flew for more than 10 hours just to visit her good friend, his voice choked. She stopped by to sleep with me on the way. The wind blew, making the windows rattle. He turned his head and saw me, then suddenly hung up the phone and stood up abruptly, forgetting that he was too tall and hitting his head on the corner of the ceiling. Does it hurt? I asked. He coughed lightly and put on a cold face. I'm fine. Your eyes are red. He folded his arms and said seriously, I was born like this. After saying that, he was about to turn around and go back to his room. Aiden, I grabbed his forearm. Actually, I have an interview this time I'm back. The company here offered a higher salary. The Christmas tree in the neighbor's backyard next door had lights that were flickering on and off. Wanting some cool air, I opened the window. From the staircase to the bed, the wind blew over many things. In a daze, I smelled the scent of ebony and a bit of whiskey. I turned my head and saw that I had been a bit too wild a moment ago. I had kicked over a glass of whiskey, spilling it all over the floor. Aiden, I buried my head in the quilt and said in a muffled voice, you didn't keep your word. He laughed, his voice very low. What did I promise you? You know very well. He got up and closed the window to prevent me from getting cold. I looked out of the window, huddled in his arms. Merry Christmas, Cecilia. Merry Christmas, Aiden. Outside, the first snow of this year in California was falling. I realized that for so many years, it had been a long time since I could quietly watch the snow fall. Fortunately, tonight, there was still a long way to go.